On November 10th, 2025, an explosion rips through New Delhi, leaving chaos and casualties behind. But you know what happened after the smoke cleared? That's where the real story is. It's an absolute masterclass in how to build a powerful story. Today, we're breaking down how India constructed a global narrative around this one single deadly event. Okay, so let's just dive right in, because at the heart of this entire situation is one single crucial question. Was this a sophisticated, planned act of terror, carried out by a skilled operative, or was it something else entirely? A fatal, kind of clumsy mistake? The official story and the actual physical evidence, well, they seem to point in two very different directions. All right, let's get the core facts straight. The date, November 10th, 2025. The location, near one of India's most iconic and, you'd think, secure landmarks, the Red Fort in New Delhi. And the human cost was immediate and tragic, with reports saying up to 13 people were killed. So that's the event. Now let's unpack the story that was built around it. So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll dig into the official narrative, this story of a foiled plot. Then we're going to look at the evidence, which really complicates things, suggesting it was more of a botched attack. After that, we'll get into the geopolitical fallout and India's super firm stance. And finally, we'll talk about why the narrative itself is maybe the most important piece of this whole puzzle. First up, the official narrative. Right from the get-go, the Indian government framed this incident not as a tragedy, and definitely not as a security lapse, but as a success story. A dangerous plot of cross-border terrorism that was, they said, successfully thwarted by vigilant authorities. So how did they build this story? Well, it's really built on a few key ideas. First, they pointed to the driver's origins in Pulwama, Jammu and Kashmir, establishing those external links. They immediately suggested connections to well-known terror groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed. And this part is crucial. They presented this explosion not as some standalone attack, but as the final, desperate act of a much bigger terror cell that was already being taken down by security forces. And here's how the official timeline plays out, and it's actually pretty clever. So a terror module is active. But, and this is the key, thanks to proactive intelligence, security agencies raid their network, seizing explosives and timers. This raid, the story goes, spooked the bomber, causing him to panic and set off a desperate premature explosion. You see the framing there? It's not about a successful attack. It's about an attack that was stopped in its tracks. And to really lock this narrative in, legally speaking, the case was immediately registered under the UAPA. This is an incredibly stringent anti-terror law. So this wasn't just any criminal investigation. This was officially labeled terrorism from day one, which sent a powerful signal about how the state wanted everyone to see this event. But now, let's pivot to the physical evidence from the blast site. Because while the official story was clean, compelling, the forensics started telling a different and, frankly, a much, much messier story. Okay, so what we've got here is a real clash between two different scenarios. A professional car bomb attack, the kind you'd expect from a group like GEM, would typically use a high-order explosive, something designed for maximum shrapnel, maximum destruction. But what did investigators actually find? Pretty much the opposite. A low-order explosive called ANFO, with evidence pointing to a blast that was driven more by fire than by fragmentation. And when you dig into the details, the mismatch just gets bigger. A professional bombing, that would leave a huge crater. Here, there was none. It would scatter deadly shrapnel or pellets all over the place. None were found. Even the device itself was telling. The detonator was found to be improperly connected. I mean, every single piece of physical evidence was pointing away from a well-planned, professional attack. So the conclusion from the investigators on the ground was pretty clear. This wasn't an attack that was foiled by authorities. It was an attack that simply failed. The explosion most likely happened by accident, either because the bomb itself was unstable or because the bomber panicked during those police raids and just made a fatal mistake. Okay, so now you've got two totally conflicting stories, the official narrative of a foiled plot and the forensic evidence of a botched job. So how do you resolve that contradiction? Well, the answer is you don't. You wrap them all up into one single powerful geopolitical message for the entire world. And of course, the diplomatic fallout was almost immediate. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif went right on the offensive, leveling a really severe accusation that India had orchestrated the entire event itself. India's response, led by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, it was fast and it was firm. He didn't really engage with the accusation directly. Instead, he just projected pure strength and resolve.
promising to hunt down every single person responsible.
And this is basically how they packaged it all for the international community. They dismissed Pakistan's claims as, baseless deflection. They used the incident at the UN to call for a global zero-tolerance policy on terrorism. And check out the final move. They presented this messy explosion, despite all the conflicting evidence, as definitive proof of their counterterrorism success. The message was crystal clear. We stopped something much, much worse from happening. So let's bring this all home. Why does all of this narrative shaping matter so much? Because it is a perfect example of the incredible power of strategic communication in modern geopolitics. What India successfully did here was take an event that could have easily been seen as a huge security failure. I mean, a bomb going off near a national monument in the capital, and they completely flipped the script. It became a story not of a lapse, but of vigilance, not of vulnerability, but of national resilience.
Which leaves us with a final and I think fascinating question to think about. When it comes to geopolitics and national security, which one holds more weight in the long run? The raw, messy facts of what actually happened, or the powerful, coherent story that's told about it? Is the narrative in the end actually more powerful than the event itself?